I wasn't expecting the world to shift that morning, but then again, no one ever does. It was just past 9 a.m. in Amsterdam. I had just stepped out of a meeting that could change the future of a crumbling logistics empire in the Baltic. The coffee in my hand was still warm, the air still smelled like rain and ambition. And then my phone buzzed. Subject line, the house is sold. No warning, no heads up, just 6 cold words from the woman who used to pack my lunchbox. Hi, I'm Nadia Clark. And this isn't just a story about losing a house, it's a story about everything they thought I wasn't and everything I quietly became. You see, 5 years ago, I bought that home in cash. Well, technically, they signed the deed. Just until you're more stable, they said. But the mortgage payments, insurance, renovation costs, those were all mine. I opened the email. No apology. Just, we got a good offer. Graham said we could use the liquidity. Graham, my older brother, the golden boy, the one who inherited the company, the praise, and apparently now, the power to sell what wasn't his. And suddenly, I wasn't just standing outside a boardroom. I was standing in a memory of every time I was told to be realistic, to let Graham handle things, to settle down and stop trying to be the smart one. But here's the thing. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't even reply. I just opened a folder in my bag. A folder that held contracts for something they had no idea was coming. Because while they were busy selling my home, I was finalizing the acquisition of the company they built their entire life around. This isn't a revenge story. It's a story about building quietly, choosing purpose over pride, and one very precise moment where the daughter they underestimated walked back in through the front door as their new boss. Stick with me, because what happened next didn't just shake a boardroom. It shook everything they thought they knew about me. And maybe it'll make you rethink what you're quietly building too. Don't be dramatic. My mother said, her voice light like she was offering tea instead of dislodging my life. You can always stay in your old room, honey. It's just like you left it. I stood there in silence, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the quiet Amsterdam canal below, my old room. The one with faded wallpaper and a cracked window that never shut right. The one where I used to cry into a pillow after hearing my brother being praised for simply existing while I was told to help set the table. It wasn't a refuge, it was a reminder. I could hear clinking dishes in the background of her call, the rhythm of a home I apparently no longer had a stake in. The house she referred to, the one I had paid for, across 5 birthdays and 2 promotions, was now taken care of. Because as she calmly explained, Graham said they needed liquidity. And Graham, of course, was the one they always listened to. She didn't ask where I was or what I was doing when the news hit. If she had, I might have told her I had just stepped out of a room where 5 men in tailored suits had shaken my hand and asked if I'd consider managing their government's public transportation reform. But to her, I was still just Nadia, the daughter, with that little consulting thing in Switzerland. The one who travels too much, works too late, and never seems to settle down. It's strange how people can hold on to an outdated version of you because it's more comfortable for them than accepting who you've become. To her, I was still the girl who once asked for help with a loan and got a lecture instead, who brought up ideas at dinner and got a polite nod then silence. So now being offered my old room felt less like hospitality and more like a demotion. There's a quiet violence in being erased, not with insults or shouts, but with soft smiles and decisions made without you. And perhaps that's what hurt the most, not just that they sold my home, but that they didn't think I'd need to be consulted, that I didn't matter in the equation. I had been reduced to a background detail in a story I once believed I belonged to. But here's the small lesson I learned that day. People will always see you through the lens of the last time they understood you. And if you've grown since then, their picture becomes a blurry one, an illusion they cling to, even if it no longer fits. As I ended the call, I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Got it." Because while they thought I'd be coming home to sleep in that old room again, I had already made other arrangements, bigger ones, quiet ones that would change everything. And just like that, the door to the past softly clicked shut behind me. What lay ahead wasn't just a plan, it was precision. Next. Well, let's just say it starts with a spreadsheet and ends with a seat at the head of their table. Graham was always the golden boy. It wasn't something he asked for. He wore the title like a tailored coat that everyone admired, even if it didn't quite fit. He was the one with the loud laugh, the easy charm, the ability to make a B- sound like a scholarship. At every dinner table, his words filled the room. Mine filled my journal. I remember one night I had stayed up past midnight perfecting a proposal for a regional tech grant. I was 17, nervous and proud. At breakfast, I slid it across the table to Dad. He glanced at it, nodded vaguely, and said, "Let Graham look at it. He understands these things better." Graham, who was still asleep, Graham, who'd once submitted a college essay with a typo in the title. They didn't mean it cruelly, but sometimes indifference cuts deeper than criticism. They called me sensitive. Whenever I asked for fairness, I was told to be grateful. When I mentioned equity, I got a smile and a sandwich. Even when Graham's startup failed after they drained part of my college savings to fund it, they said, "He tried." That's what matters. When I graduated magna cum laude, they sent a card, no return address. I wasn't angry, not then, just quiet. But as I grew older, that silence became armor. I learned how to nod and take notes when the world said I was invisible. And maybe that's what made me dangerous. Because while they celebrated Graham's every stumble like a victory, I was in the background studying, building, preparing. It's not easy being the ghost in your own family. You start questioning if your ambition is arrogance, if your independence is defiance. But the truth is, being overlooked isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their blind spots. And the longer they ignored me, the more space I had to grow quietly, deliberately, far beyond their expectations. Years later, I'd attend a conference in Zurich, where they introduced me as one of Europe's most discreet powerhouses in strategic restructuring. I didn't correct them. I just smiled, because I knew my parents wouldn't be watching. They had already chosen their favorite. But while they focused on keeping Graham on a pedestal, they never noticed the foundation cracking beneath his feet, or the figure in the background, drawing the blueprint. And that blueprint, it was about to become very real. Next, let me tell you about Halcyon, not just a company, but a chess move, one they never saw coming. Halcyon wasn't born in a boardroom. It began in the quiet hours on trains between cities and cafes, after long meetings in the margins of contracts I reviewed for other people. It started when I realized something simple but powerful. Failing companies don't fall apart because they lack money. They fall apart because they lack clarity, courage, and someone willing to see through the mess. I decided I'd be that someone. At first, Hion Strategies was just a name on a rented mailbox in Geneva. But behind it was every lesson I'd learned being invisible, how to listen without being heard, how to observe what others missed. I took on small restructuring projects, slowly building a reputation. Not flashy, not loud, just precise. I didn't want the spotlight, I wanted leverage. One of my first major clients was a dyeing manufacturing firm in southern Italy. Their books were a mess, their leadership fractured. No one believed they could be saved except me. I spent 4 months embedded in their offices, watching, listening, understanding where the cracks were. When the turnaround came, it wasn't dramatic, it was systematic. And when they recovered, they offered me shares. I declined. What I wanted wasn't equity in a broken system, I wanted the blueprint to rebuild others. Halcyon became known as the quiet fixers. We didn't advertise, we didn't need to. Word traveled through corridors where reputation mattered more than press coverage. Our success wasn't viral, it was whispered. And that was exactly how I liked it. I built a team small, brilliant, fiercely loyal. People like Lucas Hoffman, a legal strategist who spoke 6 languages and had a memory like a steel trap. People who didn't need to be told what the stakes were, they felt it. Here's the thing they don't teach in business school: control isn't about being seen. It's about being positioned. And Halcyon was built to position me where I needed to be when the right opportunity arrived. So when Clark Freight Corp, my family's legacy, began to wobble under outdated practices and unchecked arrogance, I didn't rush. I watched. I waited. Because when you've been written off your whole life, you learn that the most powerful moves are the quietest ones. And my next move, it started with a coffee-stained invoice and ended at the heart of their boardroom. Let's talk about the setup. It started small, an unpaid invoice from Clark Freight to a regional fuel supplier. Nothing dramatic, just a missed deadline followed by a polite apology and a promise to settle it next quarter. But to me, it was a signal. Companies don't collapse in a single day. They unravel in whispers in the space between overdue bills and overconfident board meetings. I had Lucas set up a shell company in Liechtenstein. We named it Kelwin Holdings, and through it, we began quietly acquiring Clark Freight's small, unsecured debts. Every vendor they ignored. We paid. Every supplier they delayed. We offered terms. They didn't notice. Why would they? To them, Kelwin was just another vendor, faceless, forgettable. 6 months later, we controlled over 12% of their accounts payable. By month 10, we owned their logistics software license. By month 14, we were embedded deep in their supply chain like roots beneath a crumbling house. The silence was key. Had I come in with my name, they would have slammed every door shut. But with every faceless invoice, every silent buyout, I was writing a new narrative, one they wouldn't be able to erase. There's a lesson I've learned watching empires fall. It's not the loud threats that take you down, it's the quiet decisions you didn't see coming. And I wasn't seeking revenge, I was setting the stage. When the opportunity came to purchase shares offloaded by a panicked investor, spooked by declining quarterly reports, I didn't hesitate. Halcyon made the acquisition through a third-tier fund registered in Luxembourg. Clark Freight didn't even realize the name on the shares had changed. By the end of the 18th month, I controlled 38% of voting stock. That's when I stopped waiting. We filed for an extraordinary board session backed by shareholders concerned with long-term strategic vision. They had no idea the vision was mine. And the boardroom, it wasn't just a room, it was the final act. Let me take you there. The hallway outside Clark Freight's London boardroom still smelled like floor polish and old ambition. I stood for a moment, smoothing the cuff of my blazer, listening. Behind the heavy doors, I could hear voices, my father's deep and impatient, my brother's clipped and uncertain. They were talking about the acquisition, about Viridian Strategic Fund, the new mystery firm that had quietly bought up controlling interest. They didn't know Viridian was a shell. They didn't know the fund was managed by Halcyon, and they definitely didn't know who was about to walk through that door. I stepped in at 9:59. The room fell silent. My mother looked up, first confusion crossing her face. My father frowned. This meeting is for board members only. Nadia. I didn't flinch. I placed my briefcase on the table and opened it with a soft click. Inside, the documents were lined in perfect order, proof of ownership, voting rights, the chain of shell companies that led right back to me. Actually, I said, sliding the papers across. I believe I'm exactly on time. My brother's mouth opened slightly as he scanned the documents, his fingers trembling just a little. Then silence. It was my mother who broke it. "You're Viridian," she whispered. I nodded. "You run a boutique firm in Switzerland," my father said. Voice tight. "No, I said I built an empire in silence while you called it a hobby." Here's the thing about being underestimated. It doesn't diminish your power, it just delays their awareness of it. And when awareness arrives, it tends to land hard. I looked each of them in the eye. "You sold my house. You overlooked my worth. You bet everything on Graham and called it legacy." I stood a little straighter. Well, this is my legacy now. And just like that, the room shifted. The air changed, and the daughter they once dismissed was now the one they had to answer to. But I wasn't done yet. Because power isn't just claimed, it's demonstrated. And my next move would prove exactly what kind of leader I had become. Let me show you how that boardroom became a classroom. The silence after I claimed the CEO seat was thick enough to cut with a paper knife. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves, clear, legal, irreversible. My father's hand hovered above the table, like he was still deciding whether this was real. My mother blinked at the floor, lips parted but speechless. And Graham looked like someone had unplugged his nameplate from the wall. "I've reviewed the performance reports," I said, voice steady. "It's time for a restructuring." They waited for some mercy, a loophole, a last-minute backtrack. But I wasn't there for drama. I was there for clarity. "Graham," I turned first to him, "you're stepping down as COO. There's an opening in our accounts receivable department, entry level. You'll start Monday." He blinked. "You're demoting me." "No," I said gently. "I'm offering you what you've never offered me, a chance to earn your position." My mother made a small sound of protest. "Elaine," I said, looking her in the eye, "we're letting go of the public relations division. It's been ineffective for a while now. But the front desk is hiring, and they need someone with a good memory and a warm voice." Her hands flew to her mouth. She had always prided herself on keeping her composure, but the truth has a way of loosening old masks. My father leaned forward, trembling. "You can't do this. We're your family." I took a slow breath. "And you always said business is business." Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about reflection. When people place you in a box, sometimes the only way to free yourself is to hand them the key and walk away with the building. I stood. Desks are to be cleared by 5 p.m. Severance packages will be honored. For those remaining, there will be an all-hands meeting tomorrow. We have work to do. They were still seated when I left, but the power dynamic had shifted permanently. And the final card. That was personal. Let me tell you about the house. I was almost at the door when I paused. Somewhere behind me, my mother let out a shaky breath. My father was still frozen. Graham silent. I turned back just once, calm, composed, and said, "Oh, and about the house. The one you sold without telling me." Three heads lifted in unison. That property development company you sold it to, I continued. I acquired their parent firm last week. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. The deed will be back in my name by tomorrow. The expression on my mother's face. It wasn't just shock. It was the dawning realization that everything she thought she controlled had already slipped away. Because this wasn't just about square footage or bricks and beams. That house was a symbol of effort ignored, of promises broken, of trust misplaced. They hadn't just sold my home. They'd erased my presence from the one place I thought might always be mine. But here's what they didn't understand. You can take a house away from someone, but you can't repossess their sense of worth once they've reclaimed it themselves. When you've spent years being told your voice is too much, your goals are too big, your timing too early, you learn to play the long game. And when the time comes, you don't shout. You simply arrive with the keys. I didn't stay to watch them react. Some victories are best left unscripted. Back in my car, I looked at the final paperwork again, signed, sealed, and quietly poetic. The address scrawled across the top was more than a location. It was a full-circle moment. But as satisfying as that was, it wasn't the end. The real victory wasn't a deed or a title. It was what came next. Let me take you there. The next morning, I arrived at Clark Freight headquarters just as the sun broke over the London skyline. The building looked the same, gray stone, old lettering, polished brass, but everything inside had changed. Security greeted me differently now. Not as Charles Clark's daughter, but as Ms. Clark, the new CEO. Funny how the same name carries a different weight when it comes with ownership. I took the elevator to the top floor alone. No assistant, no entourage, just the hum of quiet resolve. When the doors opened, I stepped into what used to be my father's office. The walls still held his framed certificates. His old desk sat proudly in the center, but behind it now hung a new plaque, Nadia Clark, Chief Executive Officer. I sat down slowly, fingers brushing the polished wood. There was no dramatic music, no audience applauding, just a soft shaft of morning light cutting across the desk. And me. This was what rebuilding from silence looked like. I thought back to every overlooked idea, every empty seat at a family dinner, every "not now, Nadia," and I smiled, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because the truth is, we don't rise just to prove people wrong. We rise to finally be right with ourselves. In that quiet office, I read the morning paper. Front page headline, Halcyon CEO revealed in Clark Freight acquisition. A family legacy rewritten. To the world, it was a power move. To me, it was something gentler, a return to the story I had never been allowed to write. Because when you're disowned not by paperwork but by doubt, the journey back isn't just business, it's personal. But this isn't where it ends. There's one last chapter, one for anyone who's ever felt like the afterthought. Let me leave you with something more than a story. Let me leave you with a reminder. This story was never just about a house or a job title or even a company. It was about all the quiet moments in between when I sat alone in airport lounges drafting strategy decks no one would ever see, when I skipped birthdays to finalize audits, when I rehearsed pitches in front of mirrors, because I knew the room I'd walk into wouldn't take me seriously until I proved them wrong twice. If you've ever been underestimated, you know that ache, that subtle sting when someone calls your ambition cute or your ideas idealistic, when family tells you to let your brother handle it or that this isn't your world to lead. But here's what I've learned: being overlooked is not a verdict. It's a delay. And sometimes that delay gives you the space you need to build something unstoppable. For me, that something was Halcyon. But for you, it might be something different: a school, a studio, a startup, a story still untold. Whatever it is, I hope you keep building it, even if no one claps at first. Because applause isn't proof. Progress is. I used to think I needed to be louder to be heard. Now I know I just needed to keep going long enough that they couldn't ignore me anymore. So to every daughter who was told to be realistic, to every underdog rewriting their resume at midnight, to every silent worker whose worth was never spoken aloud, this seat is for you. And if you've made it this far, thank you. For listening, for holding space, for letting this story sit with you. But before we end, there's one last thing I want to say. Not just as Nadia Clark CEO, but as the girl who once asked for a seat at the table and built one instead. Let's finish where it began. The lesson didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, tucked inside red-eye flights, lonely hotel rooms, and meetings where my handshake was questioned until I signed the deal. It came in every small moment I chose to stay silent when I could have argued, and every quiet decision that built the life I now live. I used to think success meant approval, that one day they'd clap, say they were proud, and it would all feel worth it. But here's the truth: some people will never understand the path you've chosen because they were never brave enough to walk it themselves. And that's okay. They don't have to see it. You do. The life I chose isn't perfect. It comes with long nights, missed calls, and the occasional pang of what might have been. But it also comes with clarity, with ownership, with the freedom to write my story without waiting for someone else's pen. That house I visited sometimes, not out of nostalgia, but to remember. To remember the girl who sat in that upstairs window wondering if she'd ever be enough. And to remind her she didn't just grow up, she rose. I don't need to sit at their table anymore because I built my own and I've left seats open for others like me, those who've been doubted, dismissed, or quietly underestimated. So if that's you, let me leave you with this. You don't owe anyone proof of your potential. You owe it to yourself to become everything they said you couldn't. Keep building, keep walking, and when the moment comes, don't ask for permission. Just walk in like you belong, because maybe you always did. Thank you for being here. And if this story spoke to you, I hope you'll pass it on to someone else still finding their way. You never know who needs the reminder.